You are about to listen to a new episode of the Pseud Central podcast. I am your host Teapot, and today I got with me Maestro and our guest Jake Hanrahan, journalist and founder of Popular Front.
Hopefully you enjoyed his conversation as much as we did.
Today I got with me Maestro and a very special guest, Jake Hanrahan. He's an independent journalist and field reporter. He used to work at Vice, but now he has his own platform, Popular Front. Would you like to add anything to that? Like anything about, your background with like anti-authoritarianism? Like, what's your platform about, Jake?
Yeah, sure, man. Thanks for having me on. Popular Front is grassroots, independent conflict journalism. We're totally independent. No big corporations. We don't accept money from people like that. We're not going to be bought out by venture capitalists, as a lot of companies are. And that's not really from a big political standpoint. It's just from a personal standpoint of seeing how that has really ruined a lot of media. I mean, you just look at BuzzFeed News. They were doing quite a lot of good work. And then because their venture capitalist investors didn't get what they needed, it all got collapsed. And a lot of good journalists lost their jobs. So we're not doing all of that. We're all independent grassroots. And also we're not like, I feel like a lot of media these days is very liberal orientated or right wing orientated, or it's left, or it's like, I'm not interested. Our only real firm political stance is anti-authoritarianism. So that means of all stripes. So if you're an authoritarian communist, fuck you. If you're a Nazi, fuck you. If you're a liberal and you want to have all these black people locked up in prison for fucking 50 years because of drugs charges, fuck you. Like, you know what I mean? People take the mick out, they mock us for it. Like, and I joke and I say my political ideology is Bart Simpson, which is just a joke. But I think it really is kind of that simple for us. We don't like authoritarians and we don't like being told what to do. And I think people like that.
Yeah, and you've run this for quite a long time now. I think you're up to your 70s or something like that. Your latest episode was about the Boogaloo Boys, right? If I'm not wrong.
Yeah, nearly 80 episodes, yeah.
Yeah, and you recorded something fairly recently that people can check out relatively soon, I take it. Something about like ISIS, right? Yeah,
just did an episode literally about 4 or 5 hours ago with a friend of mine, Haki. He's an independent researcher. He's been infiltrating ISIS bride Telegram networks. So all the brides, they call them ISIS brides. They're just female ISIS fighters, but for the sake of argument, we'll call them ISIS brides. So they're all in Al-Hol camp, right, in Syria. And I was very interested because I was there last year, and the camp is just chaos. It's madness. And all the brides there, they have their phones and they've been getting donations and they've been talking to smugglers and getting out and stuff like this. And, my friend Haki, he's been infiltrating these networks. So it's quite an interesting conversation.
Okay, great. Speaking of ISIS, one of the things I was planning to bring up was irregular warfare, and I know that that's one of your main focus, being in not irregular warfare itself necessarily, but being in these conflict areas and being directly on the field. I used to be very interested in this when I was a bit younger. I would watch every season of the Vice News reporting, and I think it wasn't directly related to it. They have the YouTube channel, and I saw this. I've seen your work years ago with the Ukraine anarchists, and me and Maestro, we were having a conversation earlier about how it's almost a little bit strange, with Russia and the surrounding countries and the rise of nationalism, how people have the balls to go out and do this stuff, given, the history of Franco and Mussolini, how they would crack down on these small units of militants. Would you say that there is some stuff going on in the background that we're not seeing that gives them this kind of courage? Or is it just, going into a forest with a Kalashnikov and practicing and preparing for the downfall of society. Like, how do you feel about it?
In regards to the Ukrainians specifically?
Yeah, I think, specifically the Ukrainians.
Well, I mean, so that was one of the first big Popular Front documentaries we did about 2 years ago now, and you're talking about Revdia, which means it's revolutionary action, and they're a really interesting group, and I actually, got on very well with them because I don't believe there's any like background weird interest going on. They're just like a group of like gnarly Ukrainian men and women who are just like, the street politics in Ukraine is largely dominated by fascists. People always, there's a lot of idiots say that, Ukraine is a Nazi junta, which is a nonsense. They just voted in, a Jewish president 2 years ago on a landslide victory. So it's a very weird Nazi junta, especially when you consider that the biggest Nazi party there got less than 1% of the vote. So it's not a Nazi junta. However, they do have a very serious problem with neo-Nazism, fascism on the streets, with the street politics, as they call it. So you've got these like groups, very, very big groups, very well trained. A lot of them went to the front line and they're like big fascists and that. And now they're in the streets doing these kind of, I wouldn't call them like urban guerrillas or anything. They're not like bombing anyone, but they're certainly, they'll beat up people and they'll try and, stab gay people and they destroy the Pride Parade and whatever. And there's a lot of that. So as a result, you got these anarchists and people like, well, anarchists in Ukraine. Well, Nestor Makhno, personal, very interested. I wouldn't call him a hero to me, but I'm very interested in him. Very cool guy. In the 1900s, Nestor Makhno was a anarchist that fought the White Army, the Bolsheviks, for the state, everybody. He was a straight up anarchist and had all these huge areas, free territory it was called, where, they ran this kind of libertarian vibe where they didn't have this influence of the Bolsheviks and Stalinism later on and all of that. So that is there already, is my point. There's a history of it already in Ukraine, and there's a lot of young lads that are like, well, we like being tough, we like being on the streets fighting or whatever, that's a part of life there. But they don't want to be fascists, and they don't like the state because they're not into this neoliberal EU type shit. Yeah. So what's the other option? Well, there's already a history of anarchism there. So Revdia, the Revdia aren't the only group. They're just the most outright violent. And, they very much believe in direct action, which gets a lot of radicals like, they're just hooligans. It's like, well, I'd rather some hooligans actually go in and beating up militant fascists who are stabbing gay people, literally, than, some radical book club where people and ah about what language can be used. They're not into that. They're not into woke politics. They're not into, like, policing language. I remember one of them was telling me, like, they're in a big group chat with some internationalists, like other international anarchist groups, and one of the guys must have said, like, oh, yeah, this fascist was screaming like a bitch, like, when they beat him up. And then they just got attacked and were like, oh, you're fascist, you're using language. And they're like, no, man, we're not against women. Like, they're all about female equality. But it's like, come on, these are street kids, these are gnarly street kids, a lot of them. So Revdia, very, very small, but very organized. And yeah, man, they're just trying to fight back against the fascist street groups. They're not trying to take on the government as such. I mean, certainly they have like shot up police buildings and government buildings and attacked many government buildings, but generally what they're really about, they're actually quite realistic. They say, like, look, if the time comes when there's another revolution or an uprising, we want to have a more prominent stance on where that is. So when the Maidan happened, the revolution in Ukraine, there was a lot of anarchists. However, they weren't prepared enough and they actually got overrun by the fascists. So they're saying, like, if that happens again, we're here. We're going to be ready this time. That's kind of what they're about. And also as well, battling fascists in the streets. And let me tell you, they do battle them. I'm not talking about, like US Antifa who are like, run around throwing a few rocks. These kids are stabbing people, shooting, beating up. Right. I'm not saying it's good, but they're hardcore. You know what I'm saying?
That's exactly the answer that I was looking for, because, again, like me and Maestro were having a conversation about like how these monoliths, like Antifa or like the Boogaloo Boys, like, and I would agree with what I heard from your take on it and the guest you had on, but like, they're not this like concentrated effort. While in contrast, these anarchists in Ukraine, they seem to be very serious and like there's a complete sincerity and hatred towards the government and the fascists there. What I find interesting about it is that, in Sweden, we have a very similar situation, or at least we had a group called the Revolutionary Front.
I made a documentary about them. That's the first doc I ever made. Yeah, I was 23,
really?
24.
Wow.
Yeah. I look very young and very green, but yeah, it's the first thing I did for Vice. Sorry, yeah, Rev Front, yeah.
And, I've been semi-active, not in those groups, but in adjacent, like with the anarcho-syndicalists and stuff in the past. And it's a very clear contrast. There is direct action going on, like in Stockholm and Gothenburg, especially. But there is none of this, like, let's raid a guy's house, break his windows, and spray the walls, With these people, especially in the Revolutionary Front, they bring guns into Sweden. They do similar stuff. They stab people, and by the Swedish government, they recognize them as autonomous groups, meaning that they will actually do something.
Are they still active?
They're not really active. I think they've been probably like split up. But I would really like, you did also a new reportage on the in Malmo, like the violence there. I was visiting for like a Zizek talk or something in Malmo, and while I didn't see the violence there, I read the newspapers and it's still going on. Do you think there's any kind of, how should I put it? And I don't know how much research you've done into it, but I know that it's not really about ideology anymore. It's about like fighting the police and really like claiming your territory. And in places like, there's different like municipal counties and suburban areas. What was that like report about? What did you find like with the violence that was going on in Malmo?
Yeah, well, there's nothing, it's not like, let's not romanticize it. It's just gang wars, man. It's just literally, there's no politics involved. The only politics is like shoot, kill, get money. It's very, that's it. It's very, I mean, there's kind of politics in the way that you might have like Algerians might want to fight, I don't know, Albanian or whatever, you know what I mean? But there's not really, man. It's very, it's just gang based, like, and they're all like, trying to get money, who can get the best gear, who can get the best guns. It's all macho bullshit, It was an interesting report to do because the problem is that the left in your country, I feel, are very, I say left lightly. I mean, you're kind of like liberal left, I guess, in Sweden.
Yes, really.
Yeah, they're very airy-fairy. They don't want to recognize it. They pretend that it's not a big issue. And then the right pretend that it's like a no-go zone and all of this. So in between is where the reality is. I mean, we interviewed a family whose son, mistaken identity, got killed because he looked like, another guy. And that happens quite a lot. I have a friend who was in hiding for a while because he looked very similar to a guy that was on a hit list in Malmo. And he was calling me like shitting himself. Like, bro, I look exactly like this kid, like, and they don't stop to check. They'll just bang bang, so it does happen. So we interviewed this young lad. His family were Iraqi immigrants from Najaf, I believe, and his family were like, where are the police? We need the police here to deal with this. These fucking gangs have just killed our kid. Now that's a family, an immigrant family saying this, and then you got like white liberal lefties in Stockholm saying, oh, it's not a problem, anyone that says it is a fascist. Well, actually what you're doing is completely destroying or ignoring the fact that these people that are in need, who you're meant to be supporting, are just, you're just wiping them out, which is not good. So it was a weird one because in the middle there was like the truth. So, and I met a gang member there, like, and he turned up with like this like bulletproof vest on, and he didn't have a gun or anything, but he was just kind of like, we have to wear this, man, like, you know what I mean, we don't want to get killed. It's very serious out there. I believe there's more explosions in Malmo than anywhere else in Europe, just from like grenade attacks from gangs and stuff. It's so crazy.
No, the grenade problem, like we have it in Stockholm as well. It's not just. It's kind of terrifying because there doesn't seem to be a real source of it. We have intelligence units. We have a pretty expansive police department, but we haven't really been able to track down what's the source of people putting explosive bombs inside like the entrances of big apartment complexes where kids walk by. It just seems like pure terror, really. And sometimes we would have 2 or 3 explosions a day. And I'm not sure if it's, they know what it is. They just don't want to talk about it. I think it's really, you know, with the left, they try to underplay it, the right, they try to overplay it. But there has been instances where the police are actually scared of telling people what's going on because they're afraid there's going to be a political backlash from that. And with the Sweden Democrats having, I think it's around, at its worst, it was like 25%. They became the biggest party.
They're the far right ones, right?
Yeah, the far right one, and they're very much like playing with fascist like aesthetics at least, and some like ultra nationalism. And there doesn't really seem to be a strong left to fight that. So it was very scary here for a few months. They were talking about kind of having a re-election because of the centrist government where people can't get along. So I guess that's like one thing that the left party has been doing is kind of forcing the government to not play too much with the centrist demands. But it's very unstable. What I'm thinking is there any kind of, with this romanticization, like this language thing, I find it super interesting. When you say like language, is it about like anti-intellectualism? Is it about how language controls people? And like, what do you mean by that? Like, or what do they mean by that?
Who, sorry?
I think it was in the context of like the Ukrainians.
Oh, yeah, like cancel culture type stuff.
Yeah, like what's this like aversion towards like the use of like more complex language? Where do you think the root of that is?
Well, I understand it, and I'm actually kind of fully behind it because I'll tell you why. Like, you know, I'm from a working class background. You know, my family are like normal people. And to a certain degree, as a child, you would call, in the UK, like the way I grew up, was what you would call underclass. So like an area where, I mean, it's not working class because no one fucking works. Do you know what I mean? Everybody's just getting money from the government and selling drugs and that. So that is a very rough environment, right? So the way we speak, we say cunt. Cunt means like nothing to us. We say fuck. We say you fucking bitch, pussy. Like it doesn't mean. I'm not talking about racial slurs or anything like that. Is a no-no, like obviously. But things like that, you know, if you suddenly turn up to these kind of people and you want to educate them on like some kind of leftist principle and then start immediately attacking the way they speak, you're just trying to get power over them. And also, like, there's a way that I feel just. Grow up, like fuck off, just get tough. Oh, I'm offended by, you know, someone messaged me the other day and said, I love Popular Front, but you need to stop using the word cunt because it's sexist. And I just said, fuck off. I've had that loads of times. Fuck off, get tough or fuck off. Like, and you know, and people say, oh, it's very macho. Well, no, it's not. It's just normal. That is how like the everyday people talk and interact. Now, I'm particularly crude and like crass, but that's just the way I am, and that's the way a lot of people are. If you don't like it, like, say what you really mean, you know. And what I think a lot of these cancel culture people mean, they don't mean I want liberation for the working class, I want equality. What they mean is I want my own little camp, I want to police it, and I want to have it run exactly as I want it. I want the power of it. They don't really want equality for people. They want to look at the tiny details on them and destroy them over something like cancel them and all of that nonsense. That is not helpful. Mark Fisher said it best, Exiting the Vampire Castle, with that excellent article where he said it's the way for like upper and middle class white people, not just white people, but like generally, to gain power within the leftist movement because they don't have anything to relate to. They don't know what it's like to be a kid and be hungry. They don't know what it's like to not be able to afford the electric, which is fine. Obviously, not everyone's got to come from poverty, obviously. But at the same time, don't then try and take over the space. And they've used this cancel culture and language to take over the space, right? I mean, look at the Chaz right now, right? I mean, you know, it's a great idea, this free autonomous zone. It's not an autonomous zone, but you know what I mean? This free area, Occupy protest in Seattle. Great idea, looks cool. Then you watch footage and there's a guy who turns up with an American flag. Now, obviously, he's trying to piss people off, but let him come in, let him see. But there's these two women, I saw it this morning. You're being very aggressive, sir. You're destroying, you're traumatizing people with that flag. Really? People are traumatized. Get out. Like, get a grip. Do you know what trauma is? Trauma is not like, and you know what? If you're traumatized by just seeing that flag, you're never going to last in life. And the revolution you want is never coming. If you want a real revolution, you want real change, you've got to toughen up and you've got to sometimes make compromises.
It's a very interesting thing, this kind of, you know, contrast between them proclaiming on the social platforms all kinds of tough messages or all kinds of revolution this, change that, or something like that. And in the end, you end up with, when you are faced with the reality and the consequence of violence, that's a whole another story, so to speak. It's a very interesting thing which now the West is starting to experience because if we look at globally, so to speak, this kind of people living nearby conflict areas, I would say even the older, one of the more iconic things would be the siege of Sarajevo, where there were like direct war and their grannies would go to the market to buy food, so to speak, directly. This kind of living together with conflict is an alien feeling to many people in the West, so to speak, and they entered this kind of world in which their rules of engagement are completely void and null, and they simply don't know how to react. They flounder like fishes because their yard people have thrown trash in their pristine green yard, and it's everything screwed over for them, and they don't know how to react, and they completely lose grip. And of course, it's easy then for others to come in and completely take over, but it's a complex dynamic which happens there. But like a thing which I was very curious also to ask about is this kind of life in the midst of conflict. You've been in many conflict zones in which people tried to do, their daily life, their daily rituals while bombs were exploding everywhere. How that changes the mentality of people, changes their perspective on life, and how that contrasts, for example, with what happens now in the West, where people are finally getting a taste of what it means, in at least even in a minimal part, in extremely minimal part, what means, conflict.
I mean, if you go and look at the way people live in the Middle East, they're so unbelievably resilient. And the idea that you're going to cancel someone out there because of, some language they use that you don't like, or a sick joke that they told, is completely outrageous. It's this same thing, right, where Westerners, and I'm not anti-Western. I love where I live. I love Europe. I love my country. I love Britain. I don't love the government. I don't love the flag. I don't love the history, and I don't love the Queen, but I love my people. Now, a lot of leftists can't accept that. They think that you have to hate against wherever you're from. Now, what that actually does is shows weakness. It makes you look pathetic. So many of my black friends have been like laughing at the minute, talking to me like, have you seen, like, a lot of, again, it comes down to class, a lot of like middle class white people who've never really interacted with black people suddenly being like, I'm so sorry. A lot of my friends are like, bro, are you sorry? Making fun, like, hey, are you sorry? You better be sorry. And it's funny and we're laughing about it, and that's great. And then it's like, sometimes I think, could you imagine if someone from these hyper woke backgrounds saw that, how they would perceive that? Like, you got these pictures of people like chaining themselves up with boards around their neck saying sorry. Black people just want to be treated equally. They don't want you to do this overt gesture, because again, it's just you showing, look at me, I'm the middle of attention now. What you need to do is shut the fuck up when you need to and speak up when you need to. You don't need to start doing all of this stuff. And again, it's the Western idea of even in the leftist spaces, the idea that, well, we're right, and okay, they're using that language, we can just change them and tell them why it's wrong. Fuck you. Stop telling people why they're wrong. Stop policing everyone. And they say it's not policing to point it out. Yes, it is. You're just being a little snitch, and you're basically rubbed up in your own bubble. It's just not real life, mate. Do you know what I mean? It's not real life. You cannot get anything done in that environment. I have friends who say things I don't like, and not racist things. That's a bit, for me, that's a big no-no in my community, my people. That's a no-no. You start using racial slurs, you're going to get your teeth punched out. That's the way it happens here. Do you know what I mean? But, telling jokes and risque jokes, and come on, man, just get on with life.
Exactly. For being a pretty, we're on a Discord server, and the podcast is kind of related to the community, like Leftyband that we have here. And while we're against, not against, I wouldn't say that, but we're not necessarily, about direct action a lot, or looking at the big monoliths. We're more interested in the understanding the history behind it, the philosophy behind it, and then thinking what are we missing here in this picture? Why is history repeating itself? Is there a way to exit this cesspool of language games? And while that is a thing, we also have this complete aversion to like policing people, like this idea of being canceled. We joke about it almost like every episode now, that like this is the episode that are going to get us canceled and deleted off of YouTube or SoundCloud or whatever. And this reality, like that you're talking about, that's kind of what we want to like pinpoint at in broader terms. But it's what Maestro said earlier, I think, is like very accurate. It's like we don't see the consequences of the violence that is all around us. Like, we might understand that a grenade is bad, it's exploding. We might feel the tension, but in the end it goes away. But these like subtle tensions of people trying to police language and trying to just provoke people with flags or using certain words, it's a very real phenomena. And my main focus is culture. You know, Maestro has a more historical background. I look a lot at the aesthetics and how people use irony to kind of distance themselves from the horrible stuff that goes around in the world. You have, there's a satirical guy who's very popular now called Dreg. And there was a recent interview with people who tried to kind of understand what he's all about. Like, why are you doing this? What's your political agenda? And instead of having one political agenda, it's like taking every political ideology and representing it at its most extreme and going against this like center. But he's doing it in a way that sounds ironic. Like, he's presenting himself sincerely, but it's so absurd that you can't take it as anything else as satire. And so you peel the layers and try to find the human behind it, and you find that it's all irony. And you have, on the opposite side, you have people like Nick Fuentes, who, you know, like, he does get deleted off of...
I hate him.
What he does, and I've thought about this for years, like, I think about these ridiculous things because I have nothing better to do, but it bothers me, this ironic distance. We've entered what, like, David Foster Wallace would talk about, you know, with irony, especially now in the postmodern era. This idea of post-irony. When Nick Fuentes is going on these tirades and uses these slurs, he's not just doing it to provoke people or to just get attention. He's using irony, like the aesthetics of irony, like, you know, you can say something in a sarcastic tone or whatever to make it seem like you're not serious. But it's very serious, and he is serious. And I'm not sure if people can tell the difference or not. And Trump, you know, he uses Twitter to instigate like some kind of cultural change. He pokes at like this Antifa group as a monolith, and you know, they talk about the deep state. It's a complete fabrication, and what you're left with is just this building tension. I'm wondering, these protests, would you say that this has been an ongoing thing? They weren't just like, okay, this is enough, we've snapped. Is it because of Trump? Is it because of... Why now is the question, I think. Why are people waking up to the reality now?
It's a good question. But first, just to touch on that, like irony, post-irony, blah, blah. Like, I think what's always good to remember is that all these terms and these ideologies and these discussions take place in probably like 1% of the population anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, generally, like most people, the people that are struggling the hardest are generally not even giving a shit about any of that. My friends who are broke as hell, working 2 jobs or doing crime or whatever from my area are not interested. They're not interested in any politician, and they certainly don't want some ideologue telling them, oh, well, do you think this is post-irony, blah. They know that's funny, that's not funny, this gets me money, that doesn't, who's going to help me, blah, blah. Now, certainly there's, and that to me is actually almost real politics, actually, like actual politics. Community politics is in my opinion, more relevant than anything, where people are trying to help each other out, or they're trying to dig themselves out of a hole. You know, people just want to keep going. Now, obviously, you can argue that the problem they're in all these holes is because of this hyper-capitalist system and the way the government's run, of course. But you're not going to win people over by, you know, launching a word grenade at them. It's just not going to happen. So I think sometimes all that discussion, as interesting as it is, and I read a lot about it, it's actually futile in the long run. It's just a club. Honestly, it's a club, I think, a lot of the time. But in regards to the protests, so I think what people are missing, and a few smart people that may have been talking about it on Twitter, I've seen, there's a guy from The Intercept, he's a great journalist, he was talking about it. Aris Racinos, actually, who I don't agree with a lot of the time, but he was talking about it, and he's a friend of mine, but we disagree on a lot, but like he's definitely touching on it. This has come as a perfect storm. Coronavirus, economy is wrecked, Trump is nuts. Like, it actually just came as the perfect time, in a bad way, I guess. And I think, after seeing that horrific execution of George Floyd, a lot of people woke up because they haven't got... Look, a lot of people are asleep, if you like, because they are working these crazy 8-hour shifts or 40-hour shift or whatever. They don't have time to pay attention to stuff. And if they do, they want it quick because, again, they've got stuff to do, man. I don't think people realize how hard it is to be your average working man and woman doing these, like, shifts, man. I've done it, man. I've worked in warehouses. I've worked in call centers. Like, I've done laboring. It is brutal, I think. I'm a lazy bastard, so I might say that, but it's brutal, man. Like, you don't have any time for yourself. So all of a sudden, I think a lot of people have gone, wow, okay, like, I've got time to just pay attention. You have to pay attention. No one can watch that video and not feel some anger unless they're a racist or, I don't know, just brain dead. But, you watch a man being executed, screaming for his dead mother as a man chokes him out for like 8, nearly 9 minutes or whatever it was. It's just like, it was a real defining moment, I think, at the perfect storm time. So that blew everything up. But I don't believe that all this intellectualizing of the protest is even worth it, because a lot of people are out there because they're fucking angry, and that is almost, in my opinion, the purest form of like action. They're saying we're so angry. Now people are going, well, why are they looting? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? Well, throughout history, things have been looted, burned and razed, and sometimes that has to happen. Sometimes people have to just vent that way. It's not good, and I certainly don't think looting independent businesses is good. I think it's awful, but it's going to happen. What I think is much worse is black people getting killed on a ridiculous level in America by American cops with guns. That's what I think is bad. So yeah, Target got looted. I don't care. Good, whatever, cool. So like when all that stuff is getting like robbed and looted, I understand. I can personally, like, I don't think it's good, obviously, but I can just see why people are like doing it. I'm not surprised. And what really annoyed me was, or not annoy me, actually, do you know what really, really came out to show its true colours? And I hate to always be going on this, like, liberal, but I think that's one of the most interesting things in America right now, is how these, like, people that were, like, all for this kind of, like, quasi-leftism, this, like, radical liberal stuff, like AOC and all in that nonsense bandwagon, like, and it's all just the same shit. Like, all of a sudden, they very quickly reverted back to form. I mean, they were, some white kids, as far as I know, like some white anarchists were like smashing up the place and that. No, that's not good. I'm not saying, hey, go and smash the place, and certainly don't do it in a black neighborhood. Like, you don't do that. But like very quickly, these people like, look, they're fascist provocateurs. They weren't. They were angry white people from the neighborhood. Yeah. And the liberal media very quickly tried to turn this into a race thing, the same way the conservative media did. But we know they're going to do that because that's what they do. But the liberal media very quickly tried to turn this into a race situation. Now, it is race. Of course, it's Black Lives Matter. That's of course. But my point is, it wasn't white versus black. That's madness. It's everyone. Well, to be honest, at the start, it very quickly turned into the people versus the police. And I think that was very scary for a lot of people who were cozy and very happy to do their internet activism. And all of a sudden, they realized the realities of a people that are pissed off. We've seen protests in America for the last 3 years. We've seen like a lot of so-called Antifa things where like few things happen. These were not that. These were like big things, right? Police stations burned down. Police have been shot. Molotovs are being thrown. People are getting gassed. The police are shooting people. Like, it was very real, I think. And I feel like that gave way, that all that like kind of almost like spectacle protesting that we've had, where people are running around hitting fascists on the head with bike locks, or these fucking losers like Proud Boys are running around in fucking Fred Perry. All that kind of went zoom. It vanished for a second, and the real anger came out. That, for me, watching was very, very interesting. And I don't really know why people want to do, is it good, is it bad? It happened. That's kind of the point. It happened.
Exactly. It happened.
You very much would have a great success as a historian because you have the right mindset. It happens. And
yes.
Right? It happened.
Exactly. It's when I also look back at events when it happens, when you look with that sort of mentality, it happens, you discover a lot of interesting layers. For example, something close to me, at least from my home country, I'm from Moldova, was in regards to the civil war and the Transnistrian conflict. And for example, what happened there wasn't like this kind of political stuff between nationalists, or it was mostly about a lot of factors which were involved there. But the thing is that it wasn't Moldavians against the Transnistrians, because in the Moldavian camp there was a lot of Transnistrians, and in the Transnistrian camp were Russians, Moldavians, and it was this kind of fight. But it ends up discovering essentially what is often ends up war being. They start for reasons people say that start, but then it ends up just being this kind of process of slaughtering, which loses any kind of sense in the end. It becomes this kind of mashing around, and it loses its sense. And it's essentially what it is, even with the violences which are taken currently. It's a process which cannot be controlled. It's social inertia.
Exactly.
It's people going at it because they go at it. These processes are very complex, very big, and they cannot be controlled or put inside a simple internet, so to speak, persona, because a very big issue with people having nowadays is trying to put everything into these comfortable boxes of identifying and labeling everything. And that happens, for example, internet encourages that, because internet is an extremely tribalistic structure, and how it's created, it's an extremely tribalistic place in which people need to take identities. Otherwise, how can you identify with each other? How can you communicate with another person? It's very much different from real life, and this way you see entire separation between what is real life and what is internet. Two completely different things. Look at Chaz, for example. Yeah, the people that on Twitter talk about them being the leaders of Chaz, or being like big honchos there, and essentially they don't do shit apart from posting on Twitter and sitting with their asses there. Well, the Chaz is essentially just a place where people, where protesters gather around and then go in the mornings to protest and return in the evenings to rest, so to speak.
Well, this is the Chaz is actually a really good example of that, and something that I fucked up in myself. Like I took like real, because like I've been to a lot of actual autonomous zones in my life, in conflict zones. I'm very interested in when someone opens up even a semi-autonomous zone. That to me is so fascinating, and I love being in them. There's an electric energy in a place like that you can just feel, and it's like something's happening, and it's very interesting. So immediately when I heard autonomous zone and saw what they were doing, I was like, fuck this, they're chatting shit, it's not an autonomous zone, which is true. But when I talk to, like Popular Front right now, we're making a film out there. We've got two lads, Johnny LaFleur and Max is out there. I was going to call him Max Geopolitics. I don't know if he wants his real name out there. But anyway, our lad Max is out there making a film. And, they said to me, like, look, man, you got it wrong. And I mean, not wrong, but they were like, that is part of it. But here's this other side of it. And when the sun goes down, some very interesting stuff is happening. One of the most interesting things, which will actually be the focus of our documentary, is how kind of white protesters are now interacting with the black locals there. How is that working now? Like, that's actually a really interesting thing. And what they're doing is very important. This Chaz thing is actually, in my opinion, very important, very interesting. But people need to fucking calm down and stop trying to make it what it is and isn't. And, and we did a bonus episode on the Popular Front Patreon where a guy that was like a kind of lifelong protester, former, quite radical, but not so much now, he's a bit older. He had a lot of bad things to say, but also a lot of good things. And some people didn't like that. And it's good. I'm like, I think this is good. You should have this discussion. And some people are like, I didn't expect you to do that, Popular Front. Good. You shouldn't expect it. We should be having these different conversations because we're trying to cut the reality cut the reality, we're trying to bring the reality forward and cut like the kind of tribalism. So some people say it's good, some people, there's certainly all these bullshit, like woke bullshit is there, but then there's underneath that there's some very interesting things where a lot of leftist armed groups from America are meeting, armed black people are meeting with armed white people, leftists, both of them, and working things out together and like making connections. So obviously the Chaz is not going to last. I think it will fizzle out, or it will go out with a big bang when the police raid it, but the fact it happened happened again is important and good that it happened. Same with Rojava. You know, I've been there openly. I love the place. I like what they're doing. They've got a lot of problems, but I think it's a great idea. I'm unfortunately I don't think it's going to last eventually, but the fact it happened is so important. For generations, there will be people, young women specifically, that will remember when they did that and women were opened and they were given their freedom and equality. Remember when the Kurds armed the Arab tribes and when the Assyrian tribes or whatever all came together to fight ISIS, and that's good that it happened, man. Same with the Hong Kong protests. Obviously, they're never going to win, but you never know. When China takes them over and turns them into this despotic region, there might be a guerrilla group that rise up and say, hey, remember when the lads did it in the Hong Kong protests in 2019? We can do it too. So I just think that's important, man. I guess I'm all about like rising against authoritarianism. If the boot is on your neck, even trying to get it off is important. Even if you know it's futile, you have to fight that, I think. But again, that's just my perspective. I'm very against that. Like the control. Other people want to live in peace. No problem. I understand that. But I don't know. It's, like you said, sometimes it's just good that things happen. We cannot just have this thing of like everything must stay the same, because there's no hope then whatsoever.
Cannot say the same is more of this kind of symbology which is adopted and is completely based upon vague and completely perverted interpretation of the past. You know, it ends up being that it's a constant line which people attach themselves to. At my time, it was that his time basically lasted for a week, and then happened something which completely changed the social composition of his period, so to speak. Things happen. You said things happen. They're gonna keep happening. Those are social processes which we at best can you approach very I have to say you very approach much like a proper academic should, you know, rather than going searching, moralizing or everything. You just look why the stuff happens.
No one has ever said that I'm like an academic.
Like a proper one, you know, like the actual, not those bloody fuckers that pretend to go and do judgments. You don't do judgments. You just present what it is, what you research, and that is the job of a researcher, of a scholar, or any kind.
Yeah, but I will say, sorry, I just want to say this though, like some people often will say Popular Front is unbiased journalism, blah, blah. Now, I've never really said that, and I'm not saying we're biased, but I don't believe that like there is really a non-biased thing. You would have to be a robot to be completely, like I'm a human being, man, and from the experiences that have shaped me, make me one way to a situation that don't make another journalist. Now, a lot of like legacy mainstream journalists really don't like me, and they say like he's an activist, which I absolutely am not and have never been, but I refuse to look at an interesting human situation and just turn it into a bland this. Like the war is not a bullet point presentation. The war is very interesting, very nuanced, and some of the funniest things about war are some of the most important to understanding it. And now I want to present all of that in Popular Front. I want to say like, hey, this and this. Now certainly, you know, people accuse me, you're pro YPG. I mean, I am on a level, but that doesn't mean that if YPG executes someone, I'm going to be like, don't worry about that. I'm going to be like, hey, what the fuck? The YPG executed someone. Yeah. Wow, this is bad. Like, do you know what I mean? But and some people don't like that. But I think, you know, their time is done, mate. That old like legacy shit is done, man. People want to understand situations, and you can't understand them unless you kind of immerse yourself in the situation, and you can't immerse yourself if you're just standing by going like tick tick tick, yep. Like you have to just get involved,
the risk
man.
A researcher or somebody that wants to understand something has to take, you know. It's even you said that even like you should be a robot. No, even robots would have their biases in regards to how they think, you know, so to speak.
Yes,
right, they're programmed by a human.
Like robots themselves, but that's another talk that would take like hours and hours upon that. But
definitely, it's very good. Like it's a novel approach, because at the surface, you know, it might look like any other report, but you have your own opinions, and you can see something as like good or bad, but you still will report it as the way it is. And what I find fascinating about these projects like YPG, like, you know, I've been into that too for a long time, and I was very much about this. I would say more like immediacy, you know, not at all like national liberation or anything like that, but this idea that you can resist, and it's good that it happens, but they will ultimately fail. I think there's a certain understanding that these small scale projects, while they would be great if it was on a global scale, because of how the world works right now, it's very unlikely that any of it will succeed. But then again, you look at people like the Zapatistas, which basically everyone in our community supports, regardless of ideological stand.
I would say that's a group that I wouldn't say support, but that's a group that I think what they believe in, I like it. Yeah, it makes sense to me.
Yeah, and what's fascinating about this group is that when people try to label it, one of my problems with what happened in Rojava was, they, at least people on the outside, try to make it into something that it wasn't. You had the main guy, if you want to call it that, like from the PKK leader.
Öcalan.
And yeah, Öcalan, yeah. And, he was imprisoned. There was this narrative, and they had this ideology of democratic confederalism. Like, I read all those things, and it's very authentic in one place. But then again, you also have to look at it, what it is, and why it happened, why it didn't work. When you look at the Zapatistas, on the other hand, people try to label them, but there isn't this story. There isn't this, like, what they are is like a very decentralized group of people that have different like values and reasons why they are doing this. And when people try to call them like anarchists or anarcho-communists, it doesn't matter. People get offended when you say stuff like that, because they're just people trying to survive. Exactly, they're trying to get by. And I think with people like Stefan Molyneux, for example, he made a documentary, and he's trying to really like victimize himself almost by like, here's this beautiful liberation project, against China, against communism, and he's trying to make it into something that it's really not. It's what you're saying. People are angry. They're destroying stuff. They're not trying to save Hong Kong. They're trying to,
they're just trying to be free, man. Like,
exactly.
They're just trying to not be. And I tell you what, there was a big problem with the Hong Kong thing, where a lot of like communists were like, Popular Front is just a liberal. This is so funny as well. Like, radicals. If you're 1% less radical than they want you to be, they just call you a liberal or a fascist.
Really.
It's so weird. So, but I just laugh at that. Who gives a fuck what they say? But like a lot of communists were like, Popular Front supporting the neoliberal agenda. Like, bro, I don't give a fuck. There's some young men and women fighting against brutal authoritarianism from China. Now, authoritarianism from China is not an opinion, it's happening. Like, yes, that is a fact. You can't say that's an opinion, it's a fact. So they're trying to fight away from that. I don't care about what you think they are doing, and, well, look at all it, they just want to be in with the EU. I don't really like the EU. I don't really like what maybe the Hong Kongers want, but who gives a fuck? It's nothing to do with me or you. Like, they're the kids who are going to get fucked when China takes over. Sorry that it's not exactly as you want it to be. Sorry their revolution doesn't tick every one of your boxes, but that is just not how it happens. People want to support something that they agree with 100%, and that just doesn't exist. It just doesn't. And it would be boring if it did exist, man.
Yeah, it's very good thing you pointed out, because it's even when looking at the past, looking at people look back at the revolutions of the 20th century, it's a very funny thing, because when you look at them, you really look at them, you understand that every revolution, red aesthetics, Vietnam, whatever, or what happened in Russia, every revolution had a nationalist basis first and foremost. It was about the nation, and it was about the people, not some vague internationalism, or it was people trying to get by, trying to get their country and administer them themselves. And if they had to use the various aesthetics to attract certain demographics, certain people, or certain international support, they would do that. That's opportunism, and conflict. Opportunism in conflict is the key point in which you win in the end. So you have these images which you present today, like yeah, they have ideals one cannot agree with or something, but it happens. That's it. It's one person needs to look at them and understand them, not try to put them into a fucking identity politics label, so to speak.
Exactly.
They put it in this nice box and put it, okay, this is good, this is bad, this is...
Yeah, and I think people should ask themselves, like, do you want X group to be free, or do you want them to be in your group? Or nothing else. Like, that's it. It's like, sure, what the Hong Kongers want, they probably they want like Western Europe liberalism. Now, I know that in my opinion is not the best. I don't really enjoy it. I don't like the way that it kind of rules the Western Europe. But like, so what? Like, it's just really nothing to do with that. They want to be free to have whatever they want. You know what I mean? It's just get on with it. One thing I will say that I was just thinking about, actually, sorry, I'm not ignoring your point, but one thing that's interesting that like the Zapatistas in Chiapas and the YPG in Rojava have done is they've got this leftist framework, which, you know, you could call it leftist, you could call it whatever, but they've not destroyed tradition. They've embraced tradition. They are saying like, no, we need to go back to our roots, not just, you know, the problem with a lot of communist things is it's like swipe at everything. Religion is bullshit. Yeah. This is bullshit. The state is everything. I actually don't like communism because of, you know, communists are fine, but like for me, like this control of the state, I just don't agree with. But I think that like the traditional aspects of Rojava and Chiapas that they've not just embraced but made a part of their ideology is where you have to go, because then people can relate to that. It's not like this out kind of like, oh, this weird ideology from somewhere else. It's like, oh no, this is about how we can live how we should be living traditionally, and then using this framework as an economic model often. You know what I mean? It's often not even about the ideology outside of the economic model, I think. But yeah, and also one thing people do need to remember as well, that like these people are at war, you know, like the idea that the Rojava is like this non-capitalist area is nonsense. Like so much of what's going on there is still very capitalist in nature, and it has to be because they're at war.
Yeah, exactly. Like all these labels aside, I think a lot of what people run into is they're trying to find this model of how do we describe what's going on and what will happen. It's like, we don't know what will happen. You know, you have the Marxists, you have the like the fascists, and, you know, there's these ideas of idealism, materialism. Like in the end, it's like these 20th century ideas and concepts and like ways of explaining, they're no longer accurate. I like to think about like psychoanalysis and like how ideology drives people. I don't necessarily agree with this political position always, but like I think Zizek has a good insight into the reality of violence. And you know, a lot of these governments, why they do crack down on the protests, but in general, you know, China has hundreds of protests every year, and instead what they do, you know, they have the social credit system. It's this really cultural consensus that really pushes people down. And I don't think you need like some advanced theory. You know, we in Leftyband or in the Pseud Central, we look at a lot of people like Deleuze, who's like this postmodern guy. And one concept that he actually, I think, is relevant today is this idea of individuals. We live in an era where people are more and more individualized, like atomized individuals, where they make an entire political movement about themselves, like QAnon. And what is kind of unfortunate about that is the fact that what really is going on isn't individuals causing a chain reaction, like some kind of like butterfly effect. Maestro, like historically speaking, how would you say that violence, in terms of not non-violence, but in terms of language, like how you can use that to really control people?
I mean that's a thing of all this time. Like it's more of a language itself is a tool of trying to limit, you know, to create a structure upon which, here it's very wishy-washy, Pseud Central speciality of saying philosophical bullshit, but it is our speciality. And language is just kind of structure in which you limit yourself into certain meanings and you impose those meanings. That's control. That's already, language is controlling already, how you perceive reality, because a tree is going to be a tree, but you have to agree what is a tree, For a person, it could be this or that, but it must be imposed. That's the thing. Imposition of certain concepts, ideas, words, and everything. This is a very essential part of how societies function, so to speak, and how they evolve dynamically. It's the struggle inside those societies. God damn it! Now I need just to I miss only the fucking Siege by James Mason and talk about race wars now. But it's an essential part, like, is of societies going forward and interacting and so on and so forth. Like,
Maestro, like you play down the struggle, and I think we all do it because like we don't want to feel associated with this 20th century modernism. But at the same time, when it comes to words like democracy, liberty, like liberalism, what it's really about, and to be simple about it, and I think you might agree with this, Hanrahan, it is a power struggle, and democracy, what it really is, it's just a decentralization of power. Like, we don't want this top-down structure, really. It's just that we're in this inertia right now, and every time someone does a protest, it turns to, it's always a disappointment. Do you see this disappointment growing, or is it more of like a fire? Do people really take this power struggle seriously? Or is it just anger, venting your frustrations? How do you feel about it? You've been on the field. What's the vibe you're getting?
Man, I think the thing is with like political violence, or even just like the people uprising violently, often it happens in a place where they don't care about any of this. So it's very simple for them often, like look at the Iraqi protesters. Our government is corrupt. The country's on its ass. We're just, we can't get jobs. We're going to fight. And, more power to them. Like, why not? I just think it's really not that deep often. But it is deep. But it's not like, it's almost the obvious choice for a lot of people. You know what I mean? And in the West, we'll sort of often people will look at it, and certainly if you're more right wing, you'll probably be like, oh, savages, or some horrific racist type vibe. Or if you're more left wing, you might just kind of be like sympathizing with it from home and being like, oh, it's a shame they have to do it. But honestly, like, I'm not saying we should have more violence, but sometimes things need shaking up everywhere. So I don't know, man. It's like you said about the apathy, right? I think the apathy comes when things just don't get shaken up. Now, that doesn't mean violence, but it certainly can mean violence, unfortunately. I'm not pro-violence at all, despite what people think. I just think I'm anti-people constantly just being walked on, put it that way. Do you know what I mean?
I get what you mean, and like I really want to point this out, we have this kind of intellectual elitism culture going on sometimes in Leftyband, but the reason that we have that is mainly because people use these words and labels, like a concept we talk about, and we're going to have probably another guest on, spoilers, but I don't want to hype it up too much, like Reza Negarestani, and they talk about these very important people like Deleuze, and one of the central concepts here is this idea of accelerationism. But at least for me, it has nothing to do with violence or causing violence. Like, even people like Zizek, who's usually, he knows what he's talking about in these terms, but this idea of inciting violence to create some wasteland or opportunity, I think really what we got to understand is it's not necessarily that nothing is happening, but that the same futile attempts of shaking up the system and then, trying to label it, it happens. And for things to really change, I think, at least in my opinion, is that we take a step back and not try to romanticize, like, necessarily violence for the sake of violence, but organization. Like, if people really took that anger and that frustration and used it towards something more structured, something more organized, it doesn't have anything to do with literature, but instead of just going to vote every 4 years or kicking a trash can. Like, there has to be some middle ground, and finding that is, well, that's, I don't want to use the $1 million. It's really the question of whether we want a war or not, because it's war is because I want to round up in a bit, but like really what has gotten me kind of disappointed with the current culture is, as a musician, as someone who was in like the punk scene and like the hardcore scene, and like where you have all these like radical cultured people, they used to talk a lot about like the horrors of war, of actual like environmental destruction, and like how this relates to capitalism. They weren't talking about some like Marxist-Leninist like ideology. It was very authentic and sincere against this like police violence. A perfect example of that is like either Rage Against the Machine or System of a Down. And you have these normal people who are like, I don't want to hear about your political bullshit. And it's like, it's not just political bullshit. We're talking about our lives here. We're talking about like how we want things to change. And even in a band like System of a Down, with 20 years of experience, you will have like the drummer be a Trump supporter, and the other guy, Serj Tankian, post his lyric about anti-police violence. And it seems like there's a complete cultural disconnect. You have the entertainment, you have the music, and then you have the political side. Like, if there would be a kind of return to this kind of authentic, I don't know, like we actually care about our lives, we value ourselves. There is a unity, there is a universality in there somewhere, that we're not just different groups against each other, but like that peace is actually something worth fighting for. If that would change, I mean, we wouldn't need the protests. But then again, maybe that's the best we got. And so I'm definitely, I wouldn't use the word pro, but to be frowning upon any authentic act, I think that's equally as bad as, well, just doing things for the sake of violence.
I think like, yeah, I know what you mean, and I think like language and violence are very similar in the way that like the context is what shapes it and what makes it important. Do you know what I mean?
Oh,
so
yeah,
like,
I know.
You know, like language is incredibly important, but so is the context in which the language is used. So when you remove the context of language, then it's just like a robot. You know, this guy said this.
Yeah.
You know, like me and my friends were talking a while ago. We was making a joke saying how, well, it wasn't really a joke actually. It was kind of, we were saying that, so imagine you went to court, right? And something happened that you didn't do. I don't know, say a guy got killed and you didn't do it, but you were framed, right? Imagine if they got hold of the text messages. This is what we were saying. Imagine if they got hold of our group chat and they read it in court. So like we might be saying, oh man, I fucking hate this guy, like I just want to kill him, like I want to run him down, like as a, you know, literally just chatting shit to each other. Do you know what I mean? Like nonsense. Or like, you know, imagine we say like, oh man, this guy, I'm gonna eviscerate him, like lol. And then imagine if they took that in court and went like, and he said, I just want to eviscerate him. Like, yeah. Then it becomes like, whoa, like the things, you know, it becomes like this guy's a psycho because the context is removed.
Actually, in Malmo, the way that the police cracks down on these gangs, and I find it completely absurd, but they're actually reading the lyrics of rap singers, and they're trying to determine if they're connected to the gangs. And so people have actually gone to court over threats they made in their rap lyrics.
But that can be real though. Like in the UK,
it is.
We have a genre of music called drill, and actually there was a guy who went to jail recently for torturing someone, and he literally had like 2 or 3 bars about the actual torture in detail in his song. Like, it's madness.
Yeah, it's madness. Like, they brought one of these guys on. He had like a white mask on his face, and he had a music video where he was posing with weapons, which are banned in Sweden. And, you know, they're really romanticizing this like anti-police, pro-gang, you know, pro-hustle and stuff. And they asked him like, don't you have any kind of accountability or moral responsibility here? And it's really what he's saying, and I think this would be a great way to round off, unless you have something else to add, Maestro.
No.
Is that what they are, is that they're expressing the reality of the situation and their culture, and that's why these things exist. It's not just romanticizing violence for the sake of it. These are the lives of these people, whether we like it or not. And to look away at it, to to intellectualize it is a mistake, I think.
But there's also an example just comes to mind. I was at the Black Lives Matter protest in London, 2 weeks ago, and it was like 90% peaceful, and then the police started doing craziness. I saw it with my own eyes. They just started running at people that were trying to go home. It was so weird. Kettled us all for about 3 hours. Loads of black lads. Like I was in the crowd with all of them, like right on the front with the police, and all these black guys were just like trying, like, please just let us go and we'll chill. Like we'll go. Police wouldn't allow it. People started getting angry, and the police basically, in my opinion, kind of made that spark happen. Right. Anyway, so there's all it starts kicking off. Guys are punching the police. Police are smashing us all with bats and that. And there's these, like, a load of these black guys, a bit older protesters, are at the front, in front of the police, holding back these other angry youth, saying like, no, stop this, this is what they want us to do. And this guy was like, they want us to do this, they want to put us on the news and make us angry. And I'll never forget, this one lad just went, fuck the news, who cares? And that's what it is. A lot of it is that, right? Like, these gangsters, even if they might make an excuse of like, no, we're not romanticizing it, the reality is we don't fucking care. And that's not good or bad. I'm not saying it's whatever, but it comes from somewhere, man.
Yeah, exactly. Like, fuck the news, fuck Twitter, fuck Facebook. Like, what matters is what happens on the field, you know, and the lives of the people that are there. Most people don't give a fuck about these concepts or social media. They are just trying to get by and expressing their anger. That said, you can check out Hanrahan's podcast and social media in the description below. And if you don't have anything else to sign off on, Maestro, I would really like to thank you, Hunter, for coming on today. And I hope to have you on some other times again.
Yeah, mate, absolutely. And I would just like to say as well, like, even though I've been given my views and I'm very strong in my views and what I think, I'm not saying I'm right. Like, I'm very happy to just be like proved wrong. And also, I don't mind when people argue and are like, you're a fucking dickhead. We shouldn't be scared of being that kind of aggressive with each other when there's a point to it, you know? Like, I'm fucking nobody, man. Like, I do my work, I have my opinions. Don't listen to me, do listen to me, it's up to you. But do listen to Popular Front.
Exactly. Listen to Popular Front and also listen to the Central here with us, was with Jake, and today we'll learn a very important lesson. Go outside.
Man. Yeah, but with a mask on. A surgical mask.
With a slogan that seems to always fit in, you know, we're not fucking kidding when we're joking. Go outside and listen to Pseud Central and Popular Front. All right, that's been all for today. Peace.
Thanks, guys. That was very interesting.